Ji-hyun wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, leaving a faint smudge of dark soil on her skin. The air on the small moon was thick and warm, smelling of something like wet stone and sweet, rotting flowers. She knelt in a patch of soft, blue moss, her fingers gently brushing against its velvety surface. In her other hand, she held a small, humming scanner. The screen showed a cascade of data about the plant life, information that was peaceful and quiet. This was her job, her passion. She was a xenobotanist, a student of alien plant life. She and the rest of the small research outpost were here to learn, to observe, to simply exist without causing any trouble. The outpost was just a collection of a few rounded, white buildings nestled in a green valley. It was a quiet place, far from the busy centers of the galactic concord. Humanity was still the new member among the stars, and everyone was watching them. The message from Earth's leaders had been very clear. Be peaceful, be polite, 'cause no problems. So, the people here were scientists like Ji-hyun and engineers like her friend Sumin. They were not soldiers. Sumin's voice crackled over the comms unit in Ji-hyun's ear. Hey, plant mage. Found anything that won't try to eat me today? Ji-hyun smiled, pushing a stray strand of black hair behind her ear. Nothing with teeth, Sumin. Just more moss. It's very polite moss. Lucky you, Sumin replied. I'm up to my elbows in a faulty water recycler. Again, I'll trade you. Their easy conversation was cut off by a new sound. It started as a low hum, a vibration that Ji-hyun felt in her bones more than heard with her ears. Then it grew, sharpening into a high-pitched shriek that tore through the calm sky. Ji-hyun looked up, her scanner forgotten in the moss. The sky, which had been a calm pale orange, was now being torn apart. 3 ships descended, their shapes like jagged pieces of black glass. They were not like the smooth, elegant ships of the Concorde. These were angry, sharp, and predatory. They blocked out the light, casting long, dark shadows that raced across the valley. Panic erupted. Over the open comms channel, she could hear the frantic voice of Director Park. Unidentified vessels, this is Research Outpost Theta 79. You are in a protected scientific zone under the Galactic Concord Charter. Please identify yourselves. There was no answer, only silence from the black ships. Then, a searing bright line of green light lanced down from the lead ship. It struck the main communications tower. There was no explosion, just a silent, brilliant flash. When the light faded, the tower was simply gone, vaporized. A circle of molten ground was all that remained. The comms filled with static, then screams, then more static. Ji-hyun's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew what those ships were. Everyone did. The Kthar, a species that did not negotiate. They conquered. They consumed. They saw a quiet, undefended world, and they took it. The stories said they left no one behind to tell the tale. Sumin, Ji-hyun yelled into her calm, her voice trembling. I see them. Sumin's voice was tight with fear, but controlled. They took out the main array. They're jamming everything. We can't call for help. On the horizon, near the outpost buildings, smaller craft detached from the black ships. Dropships. They fell to the ground like dark stones. Ji-hyun saw figures emerge. They were tall, clad in dark, chitinous armor that reflected the sickly light. Kthar warriors. They moved with a terrible, purposeful speed, their long-limbed gait covering the ground quickly. The sharp, popping sounds of energy weapons began to echo through the valley. They were being erased, silenced. The Kthar would take whatever they wanted from the outpost and then destroy any evidence they were ever here. No one would know what happened to them. The Concorde might send a ship to check on them in 6 months, a year, and find nothing but ashes. Then, she remembered. The beacon. When the Concorde had granted humanity its membership, they had been given a single, small device. A subspace distress beacon. It was a last resort, they were told. For emergencies only. Activate it, and a signal would be sent to the nearest Concorde patrol. A diplomat had handed it over with a solemn expression, as if giving them a great gift. But everyone knew it was a test, a formality. The nearest patrol was weeks away at best. By the time anyone heard the signal, it would be too late. But it was the only thing they had. Ji-hyun scrambled on her hands and knees, crawling through the blue moss towards a low, metal hatch set into a small hill. It was a maintenance conduit for the sensor arrays. Her fingers, slick with sweat, fumbled with the latch. It opened with a hiss. She slipped inside, into the cool, dark space. Sumin, I'm going for the beacon, she whispered into her calm. I'll try to draw their attention. Sumin replied. Hurry. Through a small viewport in the conduit door, Ji-hyun saw a bright red beam of light, a mining laser, slash out from the engineering bay. It was Sumin. The beam hit the chest plate of a Kthar warrior, who staggered back, surprised. It didn't pierce the armor, but it gave them a target. Several warriors turned and began advancing towards the engineering bay, firing their own weapons. The wall near Sumin's position erupted in a shower of molten ceramic and metal. Jihyun's breath caught in her throat. Sumin was buying her time, and it might cost her life. At the back of the conduit, bolted to the wall, was a simple gray metal box. There was no fancy display, just a single clear cover over a large red button. Beneath it, stenciled in simple letters, were the words, Galactic Concord Distress Beacon. Authorized use only. This was it. The last resort. Jihyun's hand hovered over the clear cover. Her mind raced. Was this the right thing? Would it just bring the Kthar down on her faster? Would it even work? What if the Concord heard the signal and decided a small human outpost wasn't worth a conflict with the Kthar? The doubts swarmed in her head like angry insects. Then, she heard a scream over the comms. It was cut short. It wasn't Sumin. It was one of the other researchers, a young geologist named Eunji, that decided it. She smashed the clear cover with the heel of her hand. It shattered. Ignoring the small cuts on her palm, she pressed the big, red button that it clicked down with a satisfying, final sound. For a moment, nothing happened. No light, no sound, no powerful vibration. Just the distant, terrifying sounds of the attack outside. A profound sense of failure washed over her. It was a useless gesture. A message in a bottle thrown into an infinite, uncaring ocean. It was not a call for help. It was an epitaph. A final, silent whisper that said, "We were here, and now we are gone." She slumped against the cold metal wall of the conduit, the fight draining out of her. She had done all she could, and it was nothing. She closed her eyes, waiting for the end, the image of the peaceful blue moss flashing in her mind. It had been such a quiet, beautiful morning. The click of the beacon was the loudest sound Jihyun had ever heard, and then it was followed by the most profound silence. She sat in the dark conduit, her back against the cold metal wall, and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A siren? A confirmation light? The roar of Concord engines filling the sky? But there was nothing. Only the continued, muffled sounds of destruction from outside. Her comm unit crackled, making her jump. It was Sumin, her voice a tense, breathless whisper. "Jihyun? Did you do it? The beacon?" "I did," Jihyun whispered back, her own voice hollow. "I pressed it." "And?" Sumin asked, a flicker of hope in her tone. "What happened?" "Nothing," Jihyun said, the word feeling heavy and final. Absolutely nothing happened. The hope in Sumin's voice died instantly, replaced by grim acceptance. Okay. It was a long shot anyway. They were probably right. It's just for show." A heavy fist pounded on the outer hatch of the conduit, the metal groaning under the impact. A guttural, alien voice barked something she couldn't understand. The Kthar had found her. Jihyun scrambled away from the hatch, deeper into the darkness. There was no other way out. This was a storage space, not an escape tunnel. She was trapped. The pounding came again, harder this time. The metal around the latch began to glow a dull red. They were going to burn their way in. "Jihyun, they're all over the main compound." Sumin's voice was urgent. "I'm pinned down in the engineering bay. I can't hold them for long." The sound of an energy weapon scorching metal screamed over the comms. I think I'm the only one left." Tears welled in Jihyun's eyes, hot and shameful. They had come here in peace, to study and to learn. They had followed all the rules. And for what? To be wiped out like insects? The unfairness of it was a physical pain in her chest. With a final, screeching tear, the conduit hatch was ripped from its hinges. Light flooded into the dark space, silhouetting a tall, terrifying figure. The Kthar warrior was even more imposing up close. Its dark, segmented armor seemed to drink the light, and its helmet was a featureless black dome except for a single, red sensor band that glowed with a malevolent light. It raised a long, rifle-like weapon, the barrel humming with charged energy. This was it, the end. Suddenly, a brilliant red beam of light sliced through the air from behind the warrior. It struck the Kthar in the back of its helmet. The warrior staggered forward, a shower of sparks erupting from its damaged sensor. It roared in anger, a deep, grating sound, and turned away from Jihyun. Sumin stood 20 meters away, braced in the doorway of the engineering bay. A heavy mining laser braced against her shoulder. Smoke curled from its barrel. "Hey, ugly!" she yelled. "Over here!" The Kthar warrior ignored Jihyun and fired its weapon at Sumin. A bolt of green plasma shot across the compound, exploding against the doorframe. Sumin ducked back inside, but not before Jihyun saw the determination on her friend's face. She had drawn it away. She had saved her, for a few more seconds at least. The warrior advanced towards the engineering bay, firing repeatedly. Jihyun knew Sumin couldn't hold out. The mining laser was powerful, but it was slow to recharge and not made for a fight. She had to move. Now. Crawling on her hands and knees, She slipped out of the broken conduit and into the chaos of the outpost. The air was thick with smoke and the sharp, ozone smell of energy weapons. Several of the white domed buildings were on fire, their pristine surfaces blackened and cracked. She saw no other movement that was human. Only the dark, swift shapes of the Kthar moving through the ruins, methodically checking every structure. She had to get to Sumin. They were together, or they were nothing. Keeping low, she used the smoldering wreckage for cover, moving in a crouched run towards the engineering bay. The sound of the firefight there was intensifying. She could hear more than one Kthar weapon now. They were converging on Sumin's position. She reached the side of the bay, pressing her back against the hot wall. A service door was just a few meters away. It was her only way in. She took a deep breath, preparing to make a dash for it. Just then, the main door of the bay, where Sumin had been standing, exploded inward in a blast of molten metal and debris. The concussive force knocked Jihyun to the ground. Her ears rang, and the world swam in and out of focus, through the smoke. She saw two Kthar warriors enter the engineering bay. There was a single, final shot from the mining laser, which went wide and hit the ceiling. Then, silence. Jihyun's heart felt like it had turned to ice. Sumin? She whispered into her calm. There was no answer. Only static. A moment later, the two warriors emerged, dragging a limp form between them. It was Sumin. Her jumpsuit was torn and smeared with soot, and a nasty burn mark seared her arm. But Jihyun could see her chest rising and falling. She was alive. Unconscious, but alive. A strange mix of relief and terror washed over Jihyun. Sumin was alive, but she was a prisoner. The Kthar were taking survivors. For what? The stories she had heard about Kthar slave labor camps flashed in her mind. It was a fate some said was worse than death. The warriors threw Sumin roughly onto a growing pile of other survivors near the center of the compound. Jihyun counted 4 others. They were all injured, terrified, their hands bound. They were all that was left of the 20-person outpost. Jihyun was now the only one free. She was hidden, for the moment, behind the wreckage of the engineering bay. But it wouldn't be long before they found her too. She looked at the beacon conduit, now empty and exposed. She looked at her friends, captured and helpless. She looked at the 3 ominous black ships looming over their home. The beacon had been a failure. Hope was gone. All that was left was to be found, or to give herself up and join the others in their captivity. She closed her eyes, feeling more alone than she had ever thought possible. The weight of the entire situation crushed down on her. There was no one coming, no last-minute rescue. The universe was vast and cold, and in its immense, uncaring scale, their tiny outpost, their little lives, meant nothing at all. She had sent a whisper into the void, and the void had not answered. The Kthar warrior stood over the small group of prisoners. Its armor was scarred and functional, a tool for war and nothing else. It did not look at the humans with hate, or even with curiosity. It looked at them the way a miner looks at a useful rock. They were resources, assets, nothing more. This warrior was their leader, a brutal figure named Grakthel. He watched as his soldiers finished their methodical sweep of the outpost. One of them approached and gave a short, clicking report. Grakthel understood the meaning. The outpost was secure. All resistance was gone. All technology of value was being catalogued for removal. The rest would be burned. He turned his gaze to the humans huddled on the ground. They were a pathetic species. Soft, weak, they had barely fought back. Their little laser tools were a nuisance, not a threat. This was why the Kthar would always be superior. They took what they needed. The strong deserved to rule. The weak deserved to serve. His second-in-command, a younger warrior named Vorik, gestured towards the prisoners. The signal they sent, Commander. It was a weak pulse, a distress call, likely to their concord. Grakthal made a low, rumbling sound that was his version of a laugh. The concord, they will debate and send a committee. By the time they arrive, there will be only dust and empty stories. It is of no consequence. He took a step closer to the prisoners, his heavy boots crunching on the scorched ground. He pointed a clawed finger at Sumin, who was now conscious, her eyes wide with fear and defiance. This one showed spirit. She will be broken first. It will be a lesson for the others. He enjoyed the wave of terror that passed through the group. Fear was a tool. It made them easier to control. Hidden behind a collapsed section of wall, Jihyun heard every word. A cold numbness had settled over her. There was no plan left, no hope. She would either be found and captured, or she would watch her friends be taken away to a life of slavery and suffering. She was frozen, trapped between 2 terrible futures. It was then that the air began to change. It started as a low hum, different from the sound of the Kthar ships. This was deeper, a vibration that came not from the air, but from everything at once. The ground, the wreckage, the very atoms of her body seemed to tremble. The hairs on her arms stood up. Grakthal stopped his taunting and looked up, his head tilting. The sound was wrong. It was not one of his ships. The hum grew, sharpening into a high-pitched whine that clawed at the ears. The pale orange sky above the outpost began to shimmer, like heat haze on a desert road. But it was not hot. The light bent and twisted in ways that made Jihyun's stomach lurch. It was as if space itself was being stretched and torn. Then, the screaming started. It was not a sound made by any living thing. It was the sound of reality being violated. It was the shriek of metal being born in an instant, the roar of engines that did not travel through the air but were simply there, fully formed. It was a noise that hurt to hear. Directly above them, the sky ripped open. It wasn't an explosion. It was a wound, a jagged, violent tear of pure, impossible blackness, fringed with crackling lightning the color of blood. The tear was not empty. Inside, for a fleeting second, Jihyun saw a twisting tunnel of impossible colors and screaming light. And then, it vomited something out. A ship. It was massive, a brutal wedge of gray steel and gunmetal. It had no elegance, no smooth lines meant for pleasing the eye. It was all hard angles and sharp edges, like a piece of a mountain had been torn loose and thrown into the sky. Its hull was not clean. It was scarred and pitted, marked by countless battles no one on this moon had ever seen. It hung in the air, blocking out the sun, a silent, monstrous promise of violence. Before anyone could even process its existence, the sky screamed again. And again. 6 more wounds tore open across the heavens, one after another, each one a fresh assault on the senses. From each rift, another warship emerged. They were all different, yet all the same in their terrifying purpose. One was longer, like a spear. Another was broader, a flying fortress. They positioned themselves around the 3 Cthar ships, which now looked small and fragile in comparison. 7 human warships. They had not arrived. They had materialized. They had been summoned from the void itself. The silence that followed was more deafening than the scream of their arrival. The 7 ships hung in perfect, menacing formation. No lights flashed. No communications hailed them. They were just there. A fact. An unchangeable truth that had been written into the sky. On the ground, the Cthar were in chaos. Warriors scrambled, pointing their weapons at the sky as if their small rifles could do anything to the giants looming above them. Grakthal roared, a sound of pure, unfiltered fury and confusion. Who were these interlopers? How had they come? This was not Concorde technology. The Concorde did not tear holes in space. He barked orders to his second. The ships. Contact the ships. Raise shields. Target the largest one. But it was too late. A single tight beam transmission sliced through the Cthar comms. It was not a voice. It was a string of harsh, angular glyphs that appeared on the display in Grakthal's command ship and on a wrist display he wore. The translation was immediate and brutally simple. It was a message from the lead human ship. It read, "You have threatened a child of Earth. You have 7 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender." Grakthal stared at the message. A child of Earth? He looked down at the pathetic humans, at Jihyun hiding in the rubble, at Sumin on the ground. Rage overwhelmed his confusion. Surrender? To these creatures? It was an insult, a blasphemy. He made his decision. He would not be intimidated by a display of theatrical arrival. He would teach them the price of challenging the Cthar. He looked up at the lead human warship, a cold hatred in his heart. He raised his clawed hand. He did not surrender. He gave the signal to attack. The order from Grakthal was a roar of pure defiance. On his command, the 3 Cthar ships hummed to life. Green energy swirled around their jagged prows, gathering into spheres of destructive power. Down on the ground, his warriors raised their rifles, aiming at the massive ships above as if their small arms could scratch the paint. The 7 seconds were not a request. They were a countdown to a verdict, and the Cthar had chosen their fate. The human response was not a volley. It was a system.as. The Cthar ships fired their first and only salvo. The space around the human warships came alive. Thousands of small, automated turrets emerged from hidden ports on their hulls. They moved with a speed that was almost too fast to see. A storm of tungsten slugs and laser fire erupted from them, creating a shimmering, impenetrable dome around each human vessel. The Cthara's green plasma bolts impacted this wall of fire and were simply erased. They vanished in flashes of light, failing to even touch the hulls of the ships they were aimed at. It was like throwing stones at a waterfall. The display of defensive power was terrifying enough. Then the humans attacked. They did not use plasma or lasers. Their weapons were different. They were weapons of pure, brutal physics. From the spear-like ship, a series of long, dark rods were launched. They were not propelled by fire or light. They were simply released and then they moved. They accelerated to a speed that made them invisible, becoming nothing but a blur. They struck the lead Cthar ship. There was no explosion. There was a series of deep, gut-wrenching thumps that echoed through the ground. The Kthar ship shuddered violently. Huge, perfectly circular holes appeared in its black hull, punched clean through from one side to the other. Ji-hyun, watching from the ground, could see the pale orange sky through the gaps. The ship listed, dead in the air, and began a slow, silent fall towards the horizon. The second Kthar ship tried to turn, to run. The broader, fortress-like human ship targeted it. A beam of strange, warping light, the color of oil on water, shot out and struck the Kthar ship's engine core. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the ship began to collapse in on itself. Its jagged edges bent inward. The entire structure twisted and folded, like a piece of paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. In less than 3 seconds, the massive warship was compressed into a silent, dense ball of scrap metal no bigger than a small house. It dropped from the sky and hit the ground with a dull, heavy thud that shook the entire valley. The third and final Kthar ship lasted the longest. It managed to fire its engines, attempting a desperate jump to faster-than-light speed. The lead human warship, the massive Wedge, seemed to acknowledge the attempt with a kind of cold disdain. A single, focused pulse of energy, bright blue and silent, shot out and touched the fleeing ship. The ship's engines didn't explode. They flickered and died. Every light on its hull went out. It became a dark, lifeless husk, its systems completely and utterly erased. It drifted powerless, a tomb for the crew inside. The battle, if it could even be called that, was over. It had taken less than 10 seconds. The 3 Kthar ships were gone. One was a sinking wreck, one was a crushed ball, one was a dead ghost. The silence returned, now filled with the faint crackle of dying fires and the ringing in Ji-hyun's ears on the ground. The Kthar warriors were frozen. They had just witnessed their entire fleet, their source of power and their only way home, annihilated in the blink of an eye. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by a stunned, animal fear. Grakthel stood, his body trembling. He looked from the sky to his prisoners, then to the warriors around him. His mind could not process what had happened. This was not war. This was an execution. Before he could give another order, a new sound filled the air, a sound like falling thunder. From the bellies of the human warships, dozens of objects shot downwards, trailing fire and smoke. Drop pods. They were not sleek or graceful. They were blunt, heavy cones of metal, designed for one thing: to deliver force to a planet's surface as fast as possible. They hit the ground around the outpost compound like a volley of artillery shells. The impact was tremendous, kicking up geysers of dirt and shattered rock. The ground shook as if from an earthquake. The pods didn't open gently. Their sides blew outward with explosive charges, slamming into the ground to form a protective circle around the hatch. And from the smoke and dust, giants emerged. They were humans, but they were encased in powered armor that made them 2.5 meters tall. The armor was painted a dull, non-reflective gray, scarred and chipped from past use. Their helmets were full-face, featureless except for a single, dark visor that reflected the terror of the Kthar warriors staring up at them. They moved with a chilling, synchronized purpose. They did not shout or roar. Their communication was a series of short, professional bursts over a closed channel. They were utterly silent to the outside world, which made them even more terrifying. The Kthar, recovering from their shock, opened fire. Bolts of green plasma shot across the compound. They struck the human marine's armor. The plasma splashed against the thick plates, scorching the paint, but did not penetrate. The Marines didn't even stagger. Their response was quiet and precise. They raised their own rifles, Gauss rifles that fired hypersonic metal spikes with a muffled thump-thump-thump. There was no bright laser, no loud bang, just a soft, lethal sound. The spikes tore through the Ktharis dark armor as if it were paper. Warriors were flung backward, their chests and helmets exploding outwards from the exit wounds. It was not a fight. It was a removal. A cleaning point. One Marine, his armor slightly more marked with kill rings than the others, moved with a specific goal. This was Sergeant Jean. He strode directly towards the group of prisoners. 2 Kthar warriors stood between him and the huddled humans. They fired at him. He ignored the blasts hitting his chest plate. He raised his rifle and fired twice. 2 soft thumps. The 2 warriors dropped. He reached the prisoners. The surviving humans flinched back, terrified of this new, silent giant. Jean stopped. He didn't point his weapon at them. Instead, he reached up with a large, armored hand and touched the side of his helmet. There was a hiss of equalizing pressure. He lifted the helmet off, revealing a man's face. It was calm. His hair was cut short, and his features were unremarkable. He looked at Sumin, who was staring up at him with wide, shocked eyes. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and steady. It was the most normal sound Ji-hyun had heard all day. "Ma'am," Jean said, looking directly at Sumin. "The captain sends his regards. You're safe now." The contrast was jarring. The gentle tone, the calm face, set against the carnage he had just effortlessly created. He stood there, a giant in battle armor, offering reassurance like a neighbor checking in after a storm. From her hiding place, Jihyun finally stood up. The Marines had formed a secure perimeter. The few remaining Kthar warriors were throwing down their weapons, holding their clawed hands in the air. The fight was over. She looked at the Marine with the uncovered face, then up at the 7 warships that hung in the sky like avenging angels. They were not just safe. The universe had just been completely redefined. The silence after the battle was heavy and strange. The loudest sounds were the crackle of the dying fires and the quiet, professional voices of the Marines as they secured the area. The Kthar who had surrendered were forced to their knees, their hands bound behind their backs with sturdy metal cuffs. They looked small now, their menace gone. Jihyun walked slowly out from behind the wreckage. Her legs felt weak. A Marine saw her, but simply gave a short nod and continued his patrol. She was not a threat. She was one of them. She made her way to the group of survivors. Sumin was already on her feet, clutching her injured arm. Her eyes were fixed on Sergeant Jean, who had put his helmet back on and was directing his squad. Sumin, Jihyun said, her voice a dry croak. Sumin turned and grabbed her in a tight, one-armed hug. "You're okay," she breathed. "I thought, when the bay blew." "I'm okay," Jihyun said, hugging her back. She looked over Sumin's shoulder at the massive warships. What are they?" Before Sumin could answer, a new, smaller craft descended from the lead ship. It was a simple, boxy shuttle painted the same dull gray. It landed smoothly in the center of the compound. The ramp lowered with a quiet hum. Standing at the top of the ramp was a man. He was not in heavy armor. He wore a simple, dark blue flight suit. He was older, with gray hair at his temples and lines on his face that spoke of stress and command. His eyes scanned the ruined outpost, the prisoners, the captured Kthar, and finally the 2 women. He walked down the ramp with a calm, measured pace. Sergeant Jean immediately turned and saluted him. The man returned the salute. "Captain on deck," Jean said, his voice muffled by his helmet. The captain stopped in front of Jihyun and Sumin. His gaze was sharp, but not unkind. "I am Captain Daehyun," he said. His voice was deep and steady, a voice used to being heard over the noise of engines and battle. "Commander of the battleship Munsu's Wrath." "Who activated the beacon?" Jihyun's throat felt tight. She swallowed. "I did, sir." Captain Daehyun looked at her. He took in her dirty clothes, her tired eyes, the slight tremble in her hands. He gave a single, slow nod. "You did the right thing. You saved your people." He then turned his attention to Sumin's burned arm. "Sergeant, get a medic over here. Now." A Marine with a red cross on his shoulder plate hurried over and began treating the wound with a small sprayer that sealed the burn instantly. "With all respect, Captain," Sumin said, wincing slightly as the medic worked. "Who are you?" The Concorde wasn't supposed to be anywhere near here for months. A faint, almost invisible smile touched Daehyun's lips. "We are not the Concorde." He gestured for them to follow him up the ramp into the shuttle. The interior was clean and functional. The seats were made of sturdy material, and the walls were covered in screens showing data and camera feeds. The crew, a young woman named Hannah at the controls and a quiet man named Chul monitoring systems, nodded to them but said nothing. The shuttle lifted off smoothly and rose towards the massive lead warship, the Munsu's Wrath. As they flew, Jihyun looked out the viewport. The sheer size of the ship was overwhelming. It was like flying next to a mountain. They entered a large hangar bay through a shimmering energy field that kept the air inside. The bay was bustling with activity. Crew members in similar dark blue flight suits moved with purpose, servicing fighters and other small craft. They all looked normal. They were just people. Captain Daehyun led them off the shuttle and into a clean, bright corridor. "The beacon you activated, Ms. Jihyun," he explained as they walked, "is not a general Concorde distress signal. It is keyed to a specific, hidden frequency. It does not call them. Calls us. The home fleet." They entered a small room with a table and some chairs. It was a medical examination room. A doctor came in and began to check both women over, scanning them with a handheld device. "The home fleet?" Jihyun asked, confused. "But Earth's fleet is for defense. It's small. Everyone knows that. That is what everyone is meant to know," Daehyun said, leaning against the wall. "A century ago, when we first joined the Concorde, we were weak. We saw how the galaxy worked. Diplomacy is a language, but it is only spoken by those who have power backing their words. While our diplomats learned to be polite, our engineers and soldiers were given a different task." He paused as the doctor finished his scans and left, declaring them both healthy, just suffering from shock and exhaustion. "Our task," the captain continued, "was to make sure no one would ever threaten Earth or any human ever again. We built in secret. We trained in the empty spaces between stars, far from Concorde sensors. We developed technology they can barely imagine. The slipspace rupture drive that brought us here. The weapons you saw. Sumin stared at him, the pieces falling into place. You're a secret fleet. A hidden military. We are the shield. Daehyun corrected her gently. The Concorde, the public fleet. They are the friendly face we show the galaxy. They are the spear for diplomacy. We are the hammer that stays in the shadows, waiting. We only come when one of our beacons is triggered. When a child of Earth is in true danger. Jihyun thought about the terrifyingly fast and brutal battle. The crushed ship. The silent Marines. You kept all of this a secret? From everyone? To reveal our full strength would terrify the galaxy, the captain said. It would turn our neighbors into enemies out of fear. So we remain a rumor. A ghost story that predatory species like the Kthar ignore. Until they don't. He stood up straight. Now you should both rest. We will take you home. He left them in the room. A crew member brought them food, simple, hearty rations that tasted better than anything they had ever eaten. They ate in silence, processing everything. They were safe. They were on a human ship surrounded by humans. But they were also on a ship that was a secret, part of a war machine so powerful it had to be hidden. Jihyun thought of her quiet life studying plants. That life felt a million years away. She had pressed a button, and she had not just called for help. She had pulled back a curtain and seen the real power hiding behind humanity's peaceful smile. It was a comfort and a terror all at once. The universe was not just cold and uncaring. It was also filled with silent, watching giants, and they were on her side. The journey back to Earth space was quiet. The 7 warships moved in a perfect, protective formation around the small shuttle carrying the survivors. Jihyun and Sumin spent most of the time resting in the small quarters they were given on the Munsu's Wrath. The crew left them alone, but were always polite and helpful when asked for anything. They were just normal people, but they carried a quiet confidence, a knowing look in their eyes. They were part of a great and terrible secret. Captain Daehyun requested their presence on the bridge before they arrived at their destination. They entered the large, dimly lit room. It was calm and orderly. Crew members sat at their stations, their faces lit by the soft glow of screens. A man named Chul sat at the helm, his hands resting lightly on the controls. He gave them a small, stoic nod. Take a look, Daehyun said, pointing to the main view screen. The screen showed a familiar starfield. They were at the edge of the sector, just outside the official boundaries of the Galactic Concorde. A small, sleek space station orbited a distant planet. It was a Concorde diplomatic outpost. We will be dropping you and the other survivors here, the captain explained. The Concorde officials will take care of you and hear your story. And what is our story? Sumin asked, her arms crossed. Do we lie? Daehyun shook his head. No. You tell the truth. You tell them you were attacked by the Kthar. You activated the beacon. A human fleet responded and rescued you. That is all true. But not the whole truth, Jihyun said softly, looking at the powerful ships surrounding them. The whole truth is not ours to tell, Daehyun replied. It would cause panic. It would start wars we do not want. The galaxy believes humanity is a peaceful, promising newcomer. That perception keeps us safe. It allows us to watch from the shadows. He turned to a communications officer. Send the message. The officer, a young woman named Hannah, worked her console. Transmission ready, Captain. Type beam, on all Concorde and Major Kthar command frequencies. Daehyun stood straight, his voice becoming formal and cold. Send the following. To the Galactic Concorde and the Kthar Empire. The Terran sovereignty has exercised its right of protection over its citizens. A Kthar aggression against a human scientific outpost has been met with a proportional and decisive response. The Kthar fleet in that sector has been neutralized. Human survivors are safe. This incident is concluded. Do not test our resolve. The message was sent. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. The words Terran sovereignty would confuse many. They knew the Terran Concordiate, the public face of humanity. Sovereignty suggested something else entirely, something separate and more powerful. On the view screen, the small Concorde station began to send frantic hails, asking for identification, asking for an explanation. The human warships ignored them. The Kthar response was different. A new ship appeared on the edge of the sensor range. It was a large Kthar command vessel. It did not approach. It did not issue threats. It simply sat there, watching. They had received the message. They had seen the fate of their other ships. They understood. The 7 human warships began to move. They turned away from the Concorde station and the watching Kthar ship. Their engines glowed with a soft blue light. Where are you going? Jihyun asked. Back into the dark, Captain Daehyun said. Our job is done. You are safe. The message has been sent. The lesson has been taught. He turned to face them both. What you have seen here must remain a secret, for the safety of all of us. You will be questioned. You will be doubted. Just tell them a human fleet saved you. Let them think it was the public fleet. The mystery is a weapon, too. Ji-hyun and Soo-min were escorted back to the shuttle. The ride to the Concorde station was a blur. They were greeted by stunned Concorde officials and medics. They were asked 100 questions. They told their story just as the captain had said. They were attacked. They used the beacon. Human ships came. They were rescued. The officials were confused. They checked their records. No human fleet of that description was scheduled to be in the area. The technology described was far beyond what humanity was supposed to have. But the survivors were here, safe. The Kthar were silent. The proof was undeniable. A few days later, Ji-hyun and Soo-min were on a transport ship heading back to Earth. They stood at a viewport, looking out at the stars. They were safe. They were going home. Soo-min, Ji-hyun said quietly. What happens now? Soo-min was silent for a long time. Now, she finally said, the galaxy is different. The Kthar thought we were weak. They thought they could erase us and no one would care. They were wrong. Ji-hyun thought about the 7 ships materializing from the torn sky. She thought about the calm face of Sergeant Jean and the steady voice of Captain Dae-hyun. She thought about the silent, watching Kthar ship that did not dare to approach. For 100 years, Ji-hyun said, we have been the quiet newcomers, the peaceful ones, the ones who studied moss and built communication arrays. Soo-min finished the thought. And now everyone will look at us and wonder. They will see our diplomats smiling and talking of peace, and they will remember that message. Do not test our resolve. They will know it's not an empty threat. They stood together watching the stars stream by. The universe felt different. It was not a smaller place, but it was a place with new rules. Humanity was not just another species trying to find its place. They were the ones who had hidden a hammer behind their back while offering a handshake. They had shown that they would protect their own, with a violence that was swift, total, and without mercy. The newcomers were not prey. They never had been. The galaxy just didn't know it until one woman triggered one beacon, and 7 silent giants answered the call.